Hi, I'm Michael Smith with Phil Brand. Tonight we're going to talk about the lead safe program in Tahoe. What happened was I heard Tracy Franklin on the air on the radio. I was thinking, lead? Who's got lead in the lead paint? So I'm like, no. So anyways, all of a sudden my neighbor's fourplex is getting completely stripped of all its paint, getting new windows, new paint. I'm thinking, I asked the guy painting, what's up? He's like, well, this is the lead safe program. They found lead in this man's house. I said, well, that's my neighbor. I said, well, no. Yeah. So I called up Phil and Tracy, and I talked to Phil, and I said, what is this? And he says, well, we have a contraption that can go through like 8 layers of paint and measure and see if you have lead from the past history. So I thought, well, my biggest concern was this house was put together with multiple parts of the house from the past, so maybe some of that had lead. Also, I just didn't want to be a danger to my neighborhood. So Phil comes over and we talk about some more stuff. He does a preliminary exam that you do a pre-exam.
Preliminary inspection, yes. The program is not a lead abatement program; it's a lead hazard reduction program. So, if you had lead in your paint, but all the paint's in great shape, you don't have any lead hazards, and the program therefore wouldn't be of assistance to you. So our preliminary inspection is to see if there's any potential lead hazards, and we do that by going through looking to see if all the paint's in great shape. Or another place where we find lead a lot is in older wooden frame windows. And a wood window, even if the paint's in good shape, if it's a painted wood window, you have painted surfaces rubbing on each other when the window's opening and closing. So that can make dust, and then that's a potential hazard if there's lead in it. So we're looking for all of those type of things when we do that preliminary inspection, and then if we find any of those, it goes on to the next step where an inspector assessor will go out and test it with the equipment you were talking about.
Wasn't that what Mr. Gorman was his first name?
Yeah, Jim Gorman is the environmental inspections and construction is his business, and he's the one that the city uses. He's actually currently the only certified inspector assessor in the Tahoe Basin. So the city is contracting with him to do these inspection assessments. And what that is he goes through with, number one, he has a piece of equipment called an XRF gun, and it uses X-ray fluorescence. Basically shoots a little X-ray, similar to a dental X-ray, through the paint, through the wall for a couple of inches, and it'll tell if there's any lead in that surface at all. And then on top of that, he does paint chip samples occasionally, and he does dust wipe samples from a number of locations throughout the house. And all of those are analyzed, and if there's any lead, then if it's above the HUD action level, then the program can do something to help remediate those hazards.
Yes, and as it turned out, we have 2 small cabins, and I had just painted one of the cabins last year, but I thought, well, we have to be safe, but I had chips all over the place, and I was kind of worried about being a danger to the neighborhood kids because they're there. Then the second house I was painting this year, but I thought I'd wait until they do the inspection, and I really thought this was kind of a silly thing. And they get out there, they found my old windows have lead. They also find that my trim on the other cabin has lead. I'm thinking, we're positive. This is we're creating a problem for our neighbors. So then I talked to Phil again, and they sent this back, these forms that are of the assessment. And I mean, Mr. Gorman was there for about 2 or 3 hours. It was a long study, so it's not a thing where they just show up and do things and come back. So he stayed for this, and he did come back for some more assessment, by the way, when I was painting it. And then I went back and they sent these graphs with all these measurements. So this is a thorough professional thing. Then we came back and talked, and the next thing was he brought some professional people to have bids to repair the problem. And then the people that did my neighbor's house were very professional. They made sure everything was safe, and I would recommend this program in a heartbeat. And that's actually why we're doing this show, because one, the Lead Safe program is a good program, and I'm here to let Tracy do her PowerPoint to show the public what they have to inform you. And for me to be on the show is only to say that seeing is believing, and Phil and Tracy have been nice enough to join me today. So when we come back, Tracy will be here with Phil, and they're going to do a PowerPoint program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction and your support of the Let's Save Tahoe program. Tracy Franklin with the City of South Lake Tahoe, and Phil Brand, both of us working on the lead program. So we want to give you a historical review of the program. The program has been running a little more than a year and a half, so we'll go through that. The Let's Save Tahoe program is run through a grant from the federal government. It's from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The current grant that we're running is a $1.5 million grant, and the grant, as Phil had said, covers the cost to test homes that were built before 1978 and to identify any potential lead-based paint hazards. The program controls the hazard. It's not a 100% abatement program. What does the grant cover? The grant covers the cost for us to go out and perform an initial inspection. During that initial inspection, we are looking for compromised paint. That would be in the form of peeling, chipping, cracked paint. That would show evidence to support that there is a potential hazard. The grant also covers the cost to send the official lead inspector out. And Michael, as you had stated, it's a very thorough inspection. He uses an instrument called an XRF instrument that has X-ray technologies. He also performs dust samples as well as soil samples. We want to confirm that the soil is not contaminated from any potential lead-based paint hazards. If there are no lead hazards on the property, you get this generally a 20-page inspection report which confirms that there are no potential lead-based paint hazards in your pre-1978 house, and the project would conclude there for you. If, however, your results are positive and it is determined that there are potential lead-based paint hazards, the grant covers the cost of construction. And Phil, maybe you could touch a bit on the construction and the requirements for the contractors. And once construction is complete, we have the risk assessment inspector go back out and he performs a clearance inspection just to confirm that all of the hazards have been controlled and that the property is safe. Additionally, the program is designed to ensure that the health and safety of children, specifically children under the age of 6 years old, who are most vulnerable, specifically to potential lead-based paint hazards. And so the grant covers the cost for those children to have blood tests so that we can confirm that the children haven't been exposed to the lead hazards. And if they have been, the grant covers the cost of medical treatment to help make those children well and safe. So what is HUD's goal for the program? What is the federal government's goal for the program? Why did they design this? Well, the Healthy Homes program was designed to improve the overall health and safety of children, specifically children under the age of 6 years old. Healthy homes are less of a drain on federal support systems. Children do better in school who have their health intact. Healthy homes are expected to provide an overall better environment for families, also to reduce and eliminate the effects of lead poisoning and psychological impacts to both children and adults. how does this program benefit the community? Specifically, how does it benefit South Lake Tahoe? Well, healthier homes. It improves the condition of homes. It improves the curb appeal. What we've noticed so far from the program is once a family has gone through the program, their house gets rehabbed, they've participated. Next thing you know, the next door neighbor's calling. Can I get an inspection? Or maybe they're going out and just cleaning up their house, cleaning up their yard, putting a fresh coat of paint on their house. It improves the rental housing, in the sense of we do find that rental homes tend to suffer from more deterioration because of the number of houses or number of families that may live in that house. So you improve the house, you make it look better, tenant has more pride, homeowners benefiting. Additionally, the main reason that city staff went after this grant was because of our economy and the struggles that we've been in, and we really wanted to stimulate the local economy with the inspector, with the folks who are working on the construction, with the local outreach and media. So it really has been a positive to stimulate the economic growth in our town.
Almost all the money stays in town here in South Lake Tahoe, so it is an economic stimulant for the local economy.
So what have we accomplished so far? So far, we developed a training program with Lake Tahoe Community College that was in the spring of 2010. And during those training sessions, we had a total of 93 contractors who participated in the training and followed the Let's Safe practices as outlined by HUD. Also, 8 contractors completed the extensive supervisor training, and this is mandatory for general contractors who are bidding on the projects. It's mandatory to have the supervisor certification. And then we also had 1 general contractor who completed the lead inspector training. There were no lead inspectors, not only in South Lake Tahoe, but in the whole Tahoe Basin. So we felt it was important to include that as part of the training, again, for that economic stimulus into the community and really to keep these funds local. So how many houses have we inspected so far? Who's in the program? To date, we have approximately 140 residences that have been inspected. Of those residents that have been inspected, we've identified 44 homes which have tested positive for potential lead-based paint hazards. Of those 44, we've successfully completed construction on 31 of those homes. And we'll go into detail later in the program about what we've done in those homes. And we currently have 14 residences that are in the process. They're either reviewing bid documents, or construction is calendared, or they're currently in construction, or they're awaiting the clearance inspection.
Most of those 14 homes are far into the process and are either done or real close to being done, but haven't had the clearance inspection yet.
To date, we have spent nearly $170,000 on construction with local contractors. Of those 14 that are in progress, about $100,000 is estimated for the construction cost for those 14 additional properties, which would total $270,000 in terms of construction dollars spent so far. About $45,000 has been spent on lead inspections with a local inspector, and nearly $55,000 has been spent on local marketing efforts, and that would be in the form of radio advertisements, print advertisements, online advertisements, purchasing promotional materials that we gift to the participants at the conclusion of the program.
And advertising, probably be a little bit more specific, is community outreach. We want to get the word out to everybody. This program's here, this is what it's supposed to do, and this is how you go about getting involved. So
how does the program work? How do you get involved in the program? Well, call us if you live in a house that was built before 1978. Also, as part of the program requirements, as outlined by HUD, children under the age of 6 years old either live at the residence or visit a minimum of 60 hours a year. 60 hours is only about 2.5 days. That can be a child, a grandchild, a niece and nephew, a child who visits 60 hours a year. Also, there are some income caps. This is geared towards lower income families. So for example, a household of 4 needs to make at or below $60,100 annually. So if you meet those 3 requirements, you would be pre-qualified for the program.
Now, all of the HUD-funded programs that the city operates are aimed at the lower income households. However, HUD calculates the income levels over a large area and kind of works out well for South Lake Tahoe, where the income tends to be a little bit lower than a lot of the foothill communities and maybe even Sacramento, in that a good portion of the households, and I think that the last census, the 2000 census that we have complete data for, showed that about 65% of the homes in South Lake Tahoe, the households do qualify for these programs. I believe that the 2010 census is going to show that's gone up a bit.
Some interesting facts. These figures are compiled nationally, but oftentimes we have folks call in and say, their house was built in 1970 and they're very concerned that they may have potential lead-based paint hazards. Again, these are national figures, but as we can see, homes built prior to 1940, nationally, your statistic is you have an 87% chance of having lead in your home. If your house was built after 1940, but before 1960, then your percentage goes to 69%. Those houses built after 1960, up until the lead requirement went into effect, you drop down to a 24% chance. So those are just some factors or some percentages that we like to share with folks who do call in and who do have an interest in terms of whether their home is safe or not. So how does the program work once you do call in and you've identified that you do meet those 3 primary criterias? Well, we will go out to your home and perform an initial inspection. Again, when we're performing the initial inspection, we're looking for your paint being compromised in some way, whether that is peeling, chipping, cracked paint. There's an application to complete. If you are the homeowner, there's just the one application, and you would complete that. And there is a little bit of verifying income in the form of previous year's tax return or pay stub or bank statement. If you're renting, then we would need an application from you as the tenant, and then we'd also need the property owner to complete an application. And the purpose of the application is really authorizing the testing of the property. Once those are received, we schedule the risk assessment inspection with the inspector, and then of course we get those inspection results, and that determines whether the property is positive or negative for potential lead-based paint hazards.
And the risk assessment inspection is a very detailed process, as Michael kind of alluded to. The inspector spends a lot of time out on the property because they're not just testing the paint for lead. That would be a lead inspection, but the risk assessment part of it is they're looking for these lead hazards. And since that's what the program is dictated by HUD to address, they are identifying these lead hazards, and the report actually says these are your lead hazards and this is what you should do to correct those. Then those are the items that the program then can address, and we prepare a work write-up which details exactly what the program can do, and it goes out to contractors for bids.
So, as we alluded to earlier, if the results are negative, the homeowner would then receive a copy of the inspection report concluding that there are no potential lead-based paint hazards, and the participation would conclude at that point. If the results are positive, Phil then prepares a scope of work based on the results from the lead inspection. That scope of work is going to indicate what type of construction is needed on the project. From that scope of work, the project then goes out to bid. And these are local contractors who have successfully completed the training and have the supervisor training, and the contractors have received their certification. Once it goes out to bid, we give the contractors 5 business days in which to prepare their proposals. Those proposals come in, and then the property owner gets to select which contractor gets to perform the work. Once that contractor is selected, Phil then prepares an official contract between the contractor and the homeowner. Then we have a 14-day window in which construction commences. Generally, construction's been running about 5 days, usually Monday through Fridays. And then once construction is complete, then we send the inspector back out and he performs his clearance inspection. Testing the children is very important. It's really the main reason that HUD even put this program together. And as an incentive, so we've partnered with Barton Hospital for the children to have their blood tests done, also County Health. And if you take your child in for a blood test, we want to give an incentive or some kind of reward to the children for their participation in the program. So if they come on by our offices, they can come pick out a toy. And again, we're trying to keep the funds local and purchasing the toys from in town, but we find that then the children get on board with the program as well, offering that incentive. Here we have some before and after pictures. We'll go through some of these. This first property is on Reno Avenue, and I believe, was it 1940s construction? Do you remember the date on that?
I don't remember. I think it was.
Older construction, but they had completely renovated the interior of the house, so everything was modern inside, and the homeowner just hadn't gotten to the outside yet. They heard about the program, we went and tested, and sure enough, there were potential lead-based paint hazards on the exterior of the home, and so they got their exterior paint replaced. Phil, do you want to talk a little bit about the wet sanding process as opposed to our regular sanding process that people may be familiar with?
Yes, the painting process, paint stabilization and repainting of the homes is a lot more involved than what we normally have in mind when we think of having our house repainted, because the lead containing paint is a hazardous material. It's hazardous waste and a hazardous material for the workers to deal with. And also, we don't want to contaminate the house any worse than it's already contaminated. So there's special procedures that they have to do. The first thing they do is they come out and they put plastic over everything. If it's on the exterior of the home, for instance, they'll put plastic out for about 15 feet out from the side of the home, all the way around wherever the work's going to be done, cover up all of the windows and everything, so none of the, if there is any dust or chips or anything, they can't make it inside the house. And then they go through and they have to wet sand and wet scrape any loose existing paint. The reason they wet sand and wet scrape, it's a manual process, and they actually have a little spray bottle, they spray water on it, and then before they scrape and sand so that it doesn't make any more dust. The lead containing dust is a contaminant that we don't want to have anywhere. So every precaution is taken to contain that on the plastic that they put out, and then once it's all scraped down and sanded, then that plastic is removed and it's disposed of as a hazardous material in the prescribed methods.
This next house, we actually did not find any potential lead-based paint hazards on the home, but we did find it on the exterior decking that surrounded the house. Once the contractor started their process to control the lead hazards, it was determined that the foundation of the deck was rotting. It actually posed more of a safety hazard, and so in this particular case, we actually had the old decking removed and installed new decking that was not only didn't have the lead hazards, but also was structurally sound and provided safety to the home.
This was an exceptional case. Normally, the paint is stabilized and repainted, and that's as far as it goes. However, the wood was in such bad condition on this deck that it was going to be more costly to try and stabilize the paint in the deteriorated surfaces than it was just to replace the decking surface. So since that was the most cost-effective way to go on this particular project, the decking was replaced so that now they have a lead-free surface there where it once contained lead. There was additional work on this property that included some of the trim material that had lead in it, and that was paint stabilized and repainted. And also the foundation had lead in the paint on the exposed areas of the foundation, and that was paint stabilized and repainted.
On this next property, the exterior paint was intact. However, some of the windows were original, and some of these were wood windows where the wood around the glass and the wood casing was creating a chalking and dusting. So in this particular property, we just replaced some of the windows.
And HUD has done an extensive survey, or sponsored an extensive survey, where they determined that when you have wood frame windows, painted wood frame windows that test positive for lead, they recommend just replacing them with modern energy efficient dual glazed windows, so that the real problem is if you paint stabilize and repaint a surface such as a window where it's rubbing on wood surfaces together, eventually it's going to wear through that encasement that you put on there, and you're back down to a lead surface rubbing on each other and making more lead dust over a extended period of time. So HUD has determined that the best way to deal with the wood frame windows containing lead is to replace them.
On this next house, the front window was aged and again was a wood framed window, and it had the potential lead-based paint hazards. And while the contractor was removing that original window, it was determined that it structurally wasn't very sound, and so the contractor actually rebuilt that pop-out that you can see at the front of the house, made it more secure, and then of course replaced it with a new double pane glass energy efficient window.
Again, this ended up being kind of an exception to the rule, in that when the contractor pulled out the existing window, there was no header. There was no support for the window opening as is required by the code, so they were required by the city building department to have it engineered and provide the necessary support. And in order to do that, it was necessary to reduce the size of the window to make it meet the code. But typically, this is not what the program does. It's usually more simple than this, but when we run into a situation where exceptional circumstances are there that we can address those.
And it's important to make it right and make it safe, and every project has been unique. No two properties have been alike, so we are addressing them as each of these participants enroll. In this next house, we found the lead-based paint on the exterior of the home, and so the home underwent the wet sanding process, and then the primering and the painting.
This was a kind of a typical example where lead was found on the entire exterior surfaces, and they were all paint stabilized and repainted.
And then in this next property, the paint was intact, but the windows were original. Again, those original wood windows. Interesting fact on this house, when the contractor was removing some of the windows, some dangerous electrical had been discovered. So, in this case, it was really beneficial to the homeowners that not only their windows got replaced, with energy efficient windows, but a potential electrical issue was discovered, and was repaired, and the home was made safe.
In this particular situation, the contractor was able to correct the electrical problem and make it meet current code without incurring any additional expense for the property owner, so that worked out really well.
And in this next house, this again is an example of an exterior paint project that was a participant in the program. This is a rental house, so this was both the tenant and the property owner agreeing to participate in this program. And again, we have another exterior paint project. Interestingly, in this house, this is an older home, and we also discovered lead-based paint on an interior wall that is actually now a laundry room. And originally, that wall had been an exterior surface. So in this home, we controlled the lead hazards on the outside of the house and also in the laundry room that was formerly an outside wall. In this house, the paint was intact, but again, those original wood frame windows from the 1950s. So all of the wood frame windows were removed, which were not energy efficient, replaced with double pane glass windows. Really is going to help insulate that home during the winter months and you know, help those children who reside there remain healthy. And in this next project, Michael, this is one of your neighbors. This is a threeplex, and gosh, we found lead-based paint on the exterior of the threeplex. It had the original wood windows, so we replaced those. So this was really a top-to-bottom renovation, and is the reason that you called in and contacted us about this project.
And on this home, again, all of the exterior painted surfaces were lead containing, so they all needed to be paint stabilized and repainted. And in this case, the owner elected to change the color of paint. That can be an option if all surfaces are going to be repainted, and it's not going to be any change in the cost. Then we've allowed homeowners to choose a different color if they so desire. If we're only addressing parts of the home, then it's not practical to do that, but in this case it worked out that way.
So where do you fit in? Again, if you live in a pre-built 1978 house, whether or not you are the owner, whether or not you're renting, and children either live or visit that minimum of 60 hours a year, please give us a call. If you are a landlord and you own a multi-unit building, maybe it's a duplex, maybe it's a 10-plex, again, give us a call. The only participants that wouldn't qualify for the program would be the short-term rentals, those houses that are rented on a nightly or weekly basis. It does need to be somebody's primary residence. But we have incentives. If you're the property owner and you have tenants and you know maybe there's a struggle getting folks convinced to wanting to participate, we can offer incentives, gift cards to a local grocery store, movie tickets. You know, this grant is federally funded. It has brought or is bringing $1.5 million into our local community. We did apply for another grant to supplement this lead program, which we have received a notification that we've been approved for. We're now in the process of working out those final details and negotiating terms and start dates and all that great stuff. But again, that's going to bring additional dollars into town, you know, that will locally support contractors, you know, and other folks that we discussed. So call us if you're a homeowner, call us if you're a tenant, say habla español, but you can call into the office at 542-6093. You can also visit us online. We have a lot of information on the website, And the city's website, of course, is www.cityofslt.us. And just, type in lead safe Tahoe. It'll take you right to our page. Lots of good facts on there. The application's available for download online. There's a lot of really great facts from HUD on there, and of course some of those before and after photos for you to look more closely at.
And there's a lot of information referenced on the website, links and whatnot to more information about lead poisoning and what a danger that is. I really want to emphasize that this is, a lot of people might take the attitude, well, I grew up with around lead paint. It's been there for many, many years. But more and more studies are coming out linking more and more problems that adults have and children have to exposures to heavy metals. And maybe we got through that just fine. Maybe there's things that are happening in our lives that we don't even know, but they might be traced back to exposure to lead as a child. But HUD says, okay, we have these funds let's protect our future generations from the problems that are now being identified as exposure to lead and other heavy metals. So yeah, maybe you had it when you were a kid, but let's have our kids now protected from exposure to these heavy metals, and this program is designed to do that.
The program will run through the winter months as well, so don't hesitate to call just because the snow might be falling. Last winter we still proceeded and had homes inspected, and we identified homes that did have lead hazards during those winter months, and in the case of exterior paint, we just postponed the painting until the snow melted. But please don't hesitate to call us. Again, go to the website to find out more information online. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share the details about this great program with you.
Thank you.
The clarity of the lake is that factor of Tahoe that is the most recognizable and the most renowned.
To Californians and Nevadans, and I think a lot of people around the U.S., it is this special place.
You can't just take this place for granted because there are not many places like this in the world.
We're lucky enough that we get to live here full time. It's not a national park, so we have to do our part to protect this place.
The Angora fire from 2 years ago had a profound impact on wildfire threat reduction efforts in the Tahoe Basin. The wake-up call was primarily to the homeowners and to, I think, a lot of various agencies around the lake that this is a priority environmental issue for the basin and needs to be dealt with. Recent assessments of communities in the Lake Tahoe Basin have indicated the majority of these communities are rated at high or extreme wildfire hazard.
Well, as a property owner, the two most important responsibilities are putting in your best management practices, controlling the storm water on your property, and creating defensible space around your home.
Do it all together. It's just cleaning up your landscape, making a conservation landscape happen.
Over the years, the Lake Tahoe Basin has been built up, and the development included a lot of road infrastructure. So there's been a lot of surface pavement, a lot of disturbance in the watershed. That development over the years has collectively input pollutants into Lake Tahoe. Those pollutants are nitrogen, phosphorus, and fine sediment. And the fine sediment clouds the lake, and the nitrogen and phosphorus makes the algae grow.
Majority of pollutants that enter Lake Tahoe come from the urban areas.
What we've learned recently in the last 5 years is that nutrients are not our main problem. It's actually the fine sediment that is our primary problem. The fine sediment is causing over 2/3 of the clarity loss.
These particles are literally invisible by themselves.
They're so light and they're so small that the kinetic energy in the lake actually keeps the particles in suspension. Now with urbanization, we've introduced disturbance to the soils, to the landscape, and we've increased the production of very fine particles. Healthy watersheds typically, and we do have some healthy watersheds here in the Tahoe Basin, the healthy watersheds actually infiltrate most of their water. It's actually dispersed across the landscape and then it soaks into the soil. As it soaks into the soils actually remove particles. The particles are removed like a filter, like a sand filter. That's the process by which the natural system keeps the water clean. Most of the BMPs function by mimicking processes that occur naturally.
A lot of our urban areas are built in flatland, and that flatland used to be the floodplains and the wetlands and the meadows of the streams. And so we've removed the part of the system that used to do the cleansing. When we started our long-term measurements back in the 60s, you could see down on average about 100 feet.
Tahoe's not there anymore. Tahoe changed dramatically.
There's been over a 30-foot loss of clarity in the last 40 years.
Back in '97, we went as low as 64 feet. We were kind of in a nosedive of decline, and that's when everybody came together and said, Lake Tahoe's too important. We don't want to get past that point of no return where we could never get back to 100 feet of clarity. And that's when our environmental improvement program really gelled, and people from the private sector, the environmental community, the government agencies all started working together with a cohesive plan of restoration. In the late 90s, we implemented what we call best management practices, the BMPs, on residential parcels.
The fact that private property owners need to install their BMPs, it's really their contribution to the EIP. It's the private contribution that matches against the public contribution.
72% of the fine particles getting into Lake Tahoe are coming from the urbanized areas of the lake.
BMPs actually need to be implemented by everybody up at the lake. They're being implemented by the towns and cities, by the counties, by the state of Nevada, state of California, and they have to be implemented by all the residents, all the property owners here. It's required that all property owners, whether it's a condominium complex, apartment house, or private single-family dwellings, they need to implement BMPs. Each property owner that implements BMPs is correcting the problems that we've created by developing that parcel. If a lot of property owners, hundreds and thousands of property owners do that, the little bit of sediment from each property becomes a whole lot of sediment that we're preventing from getting into the lake, and that's going to have a real impact. Property owners should be thinking about both their fire defensible space practices and their best management practices at the same time. It's a better way to get an overall result that's going to make the house safer, more attractive, and it's going to meet the needs of Lake Tahoe by preventing that erosion.
I'm with the Nevada Tahoe Conservation District, and you made an appointment with me a couple of days ago.
When a property owner wants to get started, they should actually call their conservation district. If they live in Nevada, it's the Nevada Tahoe Conservation District. If they live in California, it's the Tahoe Resource Conservation District. They can find out what needs to happen on that property to meet best management practices requirements. They can call their local fire protection district and get a fire defensible space inspection.
All these lower branches in this tree are dead, and they constitute a real fire hazard.
And by doing those things at the same time or close together and then making their plan, they can come up with a plan that's going to work. It's going to save them time and money in the long run. Property owners can actually look at their own property to determine what kind of erosion hazards they have, what kind of water quality impact their property might be having.
Homeowners can look for these kind of signs, these little sandbars, deposits of fine sand, these little channels which we call rills or small gullies. And when they spot those on their property, they know they've spotted an erosion problem. Now it can be fixed by infiltrating the water coming off of their rooftop and their driveways. It can be fixed by improving the vegetation so that the soil is more protected from erosion, or maybe putting rocks under the drip line of the house. But this is the result of a lack of best management practices on the upstream properties.
People should try to make their landscape act like a sponge to soak up water that falls on it.
If you can infiltrate it, you essentially stop that fine sediment particle from coming off the land and going into the tributary and into the lake.
If a property has bare soil, we want to cover it up with mulch or plants.
We had 21 trees taken out of our property, and there was a lot of slash out here from the limbs and whatever, and so the fire department chipped them. I had them blow them up here on the hill, and it doesn't erode any longer. So there was a byproduct from our fuel reduction work that really helped our BMPs.
When slopes get over 50% in steepness, they need something more than plants and mulch.
Here we have a block wall that was created without any mortar. We took a slope that was really steep and we created a relatively flat planting area. It's a terrace. It can rain as hard as it wants, and there's not going to be a bunch of erosion happening on this slope because it's stabilized by these structures.
An unpaved driveway, that's really a source of erosion. When a heavy rain comes, it'll become muddy. If they drive from the muddy driveway out onto the road, they'll track a lot of sediment out onto the road, which will then, in turn, that'll wash into the roadside ditch or to the culvert and storm drain, and it'll get carried to the lake. Paving driveways is required at Lake Tahoe. When they're paved, the planning needs to be done so that they drain, so that the runoff from the driveway will flow not into the street, but into an infiltration system on the property where it will go into the soil. One of the best management practices that's fairly easy for people to do is to deal with the runoff coming off their roofs. The rain will pour right off that roof eave like a little waterfall. We call that the drip line of the house. Where that hits the soil, it can erode the soil if there's nothing protecting the soil.
You can put down something like rock or gravel. In this case, we have river cobbles and stones. That'll protect the ground from that erosion. And when you put rock right from your house 5 feet out, you've created a non-combustible zone, which gives you a great amount of benefit for the defensible space.
The definition of defensible space is that area between your house and an oncoming wildfire where the vegetation has been managed to reduce the fire threat. It provides a safe area for firefighters to defend your home, and in the event that there are not firefighters available, it helps the house survive on its own without assistance. And when you're creating defensible space, it's largely the use of these three techniques. Reduction, basically pruning up plants. Removal, taking out plants so there's less plants available to burn. And then replacement, taking out a hazardous plant and replacing it with a plant that's much safer from a fire standpoint. And so we'd refer to those as the 3 R's.
This is a firefighter's nightmare. This is a continuum of highly flammable manzanita, and you can just see how incredibly dry it is. It's just brittly dry here. If a fire started here, I think there's very little that can be done to save these homes.
The more densely packed vegetation is, the more rapidly fire can burn through it. The general rule of thumb we use for separation between shrubs is 2 times the height of the shrub. And so, for example, on this dogwood right here, if it was 2 foot tall, we'd want a separation of about 4 feet, more or less, between the branches between these 2 shrubs. A good replacement plant choice are herbaceous plants like daylilies. Because they're herbaceous, they're mostly water by weight. The more moisture a plant has in it, the harder it is to ignite, the slower it's going to burn, and the cooler it's going to burn. Landscapes that emphasize flowers, green grass, those types of things are your best choice. The lean, clean, and green zone is a phrase that we coined to express what the vegetation should look like within 30 feet of your home. We call it lean because there's low amounts of flammable vegetation. Clean because maintenance is a priority in this area, so we keep pine needles, pine cones, that stuff raked up and out of the way. And we call it green because we're emphasizing green herbaceous plants that are under irrigation. The non-combustible area is that area within 5 feet of the footprint of your home. This area is critical in terms of your house surviving a wildfire. It needs to be the most ignition-resistant part of your defensible space. A good example of the compatibility of best management practices with defensible space in the non-combustible area is the use of gravel infiltration system underneath the drip lines. Within this 5 feet area, we have a non-combustible material. And so in the event of a wildfire approaching this home and spewing embers that are going to hit the side of this house and start to accumulate down here at the base, there's no chance for ignition. Gravel doesn't ignite.
If you do not have a defensible space around your house, then the fire department may not be able to defend your house if a catastrophic wildfire comes through Tahoe again.
The ultimate thing that's at stake is human life.
If we have a fire in here, it will never be the same in our lifetime. It will never be the same environment. Think of the property loss in here, just the value of the properties and just the emotional loss.
BMPs are part of the way of life up here. It's an investment in the future of the property value because if the lake were to continue to lose clarity, all the property values here would fall. It does take a little bit of learning, a little bit of education.
The resources available include everything from an individual site visit where professionals can talk to you about your BMPs to demonstration gardens where you can go and at your leisure walk through a garden that has best management practices in place.
Those of us that live here are very privileged to be able to live in such a place. I really just think it's the least that we can do to go the extra mile in terms of stewardship of our own property.
Those of us living at Tahoe, those of us who use the lake, the responsibility is on us.
The only way we're going to really clean up the lake is if everybody is working together to install their best management practices.
All anybody has to do is look out to Lake Tahoe to answer the question, is it worth it? It's absolutely worth it. I think we have not only an imperative to try, but to succeed.
We're all in together if we want to clean up Lake Tahoe.